All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the launch of the Fairness to Freedom campaign, our campaign for universal representation. Going to get started. Our hosts today are Kika Matos, Vice President of Initiatives at Vera, and also Nicole Malaku, the Executive Director of the National Partnership for New Americans. As you come into the chat, please add your name, your organization, and your location, so that we can really show the power of who is in the room. Again, welcome to the event. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Nicole Malaku, Executive Director of NPNA, to get us started. Over to you, Nicole.
Thank you so much, Annie, and welcome everyone to the official launch of our Fairness to Freedom, the campaign for universal representation event today. My name is Nicole Malaku, as Annie mentioned, pronouns she, her. I'm the Executive Director of the National Partnership for New Americans, a multi-ethnic, multiracial network that brings together nearly 50 of the largest state-based immigrant advocacy organizations with presence in 41 states. We're proud to be partnering with the Vera Institute of Justice on this transformational campaign to ensure due process for anyone engaged with the immigration system. And we're proud to partner with all of you and our 114 endorsing organizations to bring this campaign to life. Let's bring up our map to show our reach across today's event. We have people joining us from over 258 organizations across 32 states today. And many of you have already endorsed the Fairness to Freedom campaign, and it shows based on the representation of who's joining us today. I'd also like to show us the list of endorsing organizations, which range from advocacy organizations to elected officials to our philanthropic partners. It's your organizations and our community would like to sign on. We'll circulate a form following today's rally. Thank you so much to all of you who have signed on. I'd like to give a special shout out to our sister coalition, the Fair Immigration Reform Movement, who's joining us en masse today from New Orleans. Thank you for all you do on the NPNA network to uphold justice and dignity for all of our community. Again, thank you for joining our exciting campaign rally today. It's the power of our coalition that will move our fight forward for universal representation. Everyone today is hearing the campaign name for the first time. Fairness to Freedom. Let's say it together, panelists. So on the count of three, I'm going to have you all join me. 1, 2, 3. Fairness to freedom. Through this campaign, we'll call for fairness in a person's case in the immigration system because we know that due process is a fundamental human right. Universal representation means correcting the fundamental injustice in immigration proceedings so everyone's right to due process is upheld and everyone is treated fairly and with dignity under the law. And we call for freedom from detention, from fear, and freedom from the threat of deportation. At this time, every person facing our immigration system, it's long due over time that every person facing our immigration system has federally funded legal representation so we can stay true to our nation's values of due process and access to justice. The current system is not navigable for the vast majority of those facing deportation and results in many people, including those fleeing persecution and seeking asylum in our country, and many children representing themselves in court. Today's launch for our campaign for federal universal representation marks a milestone for immigrants across the country, and we hope our elected officials will heed our call to provide federally funded legal representation for anyone facing deportation. Now and throughout the agenda, we ask you to share this campaign and call widely and loudly on social media using the toolkit, which you'll see in the chat box now. Thank you again for joining us. And now I'll turn it over to my friend and my sister in the struggle, Kika Matos, Vice President of Initiatives at the Vera Institute. Kika?
Thank you very much, Nicole, and good afternoon to everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining us. Let me build on some of Nicole's inspiring comments and talk about why we feel that the time is now to launch a campaign for universal representation. First, this movement, which is our movement, has been growing really, really fast, both at the state and at the local level. You saw the amazing slide that Nicole shared with us. It really captures how quickly we have grown. For more than 5 years now, we've been intensely focused on creating this movement and building this campaign for universal representation. And let me note that many of you who are here with us today were here at the outset, and still today, you continue to lead this movement. And for that, we are internally grateful. Sadly, still today, even with a new administration, even with a new president, detentions, deportations, family separations still happen all across immigrant communities in this country. The current administration has held on to some xenophobic policies, and they are in essence an assault on immigrants, an assault on asylees, an assault on our democracy. And so we have to fight back. Just this morning, I note that outside of the Supreme Court, some of the folks who are on this call today were rallying and demanding an end to the repulsive and deeply harmful Remain in Mexico policies. It is in the face of these anti-immigrant policies and rhetoric, it is in the face of a public health pandemic, and it is in the face of the continuing criminalization and separation of immigrant families that communities across the country have stepped up to ensure that people facing deportation and detention have a lawyer fighting with them and fighting for them. Today, there are sadly hundreds of thousands of adults and children, even children facing deportation, and they have no lawyer representing them. Let me just share some sobering statistics with you. There are more than 1.6 million pending deportation cases right now in immigration court, and over half of them, over 800,000 adults and kids, have zero legal representation. So they're forced to do this on their own. They're forced to fend against a deeply resourced federal government. And we find that unjust, and we think that is something that we need to fix immediately. Not just that, but we know what's happening in the border. There are tens of thousands of people who are being detained through what we think is an ever-growing, cruel, and unaccountable system of enforcement. Our research also shows that it is almost impossible to win relief from deportation unless you have a lawyer. Let me share again some more deeply disturbing statistics. In the last 20 years, only 7% of people who have fought their cases on their own without lawyers have been able to win relief from deportation. So that, in essence, is why we are launching this campaign for federally funded universal representation. We see universal representation really as a key part of a fight for broader reforms to undo a biased immigration system. And let me just be clear about something. We do not believe that legal representation alone is going to undo decades of systemic injustices. But we do know that without a lawyer, many people who have a right to stay in this country will instead be detained, deported, and separated from their families and homes, forced to return to the very conditions from which they fled in the first place. This is ultimately an issue of justice. Let me say that again. This is ultimately an issue of justice. It is also a due process issue. It is also a racial justice issue. It is an economic issue. And in light of the number of folks who had to suffer through a pandemic in detention, it is also a health issue. What a Fairness to Freedom campaign demands is simple. It's that our federal leaders respond quickly to the desperate need for legal representation by introducing and passing legislation to advance a right to federally funded universal representation. I'm tremendously proud to be here today, standing with my sister, Nicole Malacu, and the phenomenal organization that is NPNA. We are standing on the shoulders of giants. I've worked with some of these movement leaders closely in the past and have nothing but love and respect for them. So Vera is proud to be standing alongside NPNA and the organizations that are allied to say loudly and clearly that the time is now for this movement to demand federally funded universal representation for all. Let me pivot quickly just to say that we are tremendously lucky, in addition to having Nicole be a partner with Vera on this campaign. We are also tremendously privileged and blessed to have other movement leaders with us, fierce advocates, immigrant leaders, on this call today, and not just on this call today, but they're also part of the Campaign for Universal Representation. Let me quickly introduce them. Presente are Lindsay Kozlowski, who is the Executive Director of the Immigrant Defender Law Center. Welcome, Lindsay. We have Ramon, who is a client of the Immigrant Defender Law Center. Bienvenido, Ramon. We have Angelica Salas, who is the Executive Director of CHIRLA. We have Gustavo Torres, who is the Executive Director of CASA. We have Rafael, who is a member of CASA. We also have Oscar Chacon, who's the Executive Director of Alianza Americas. We have two public officials with us, Commissioner Alma Anaya, who is a Cook County Commissioner from Illinois, and we have Assembly Member Catalina Cruz of New York State. So we have an embarrassment of riches here with us today. Let me cut to the chase and pivot to the people that we want to hear from. And Lindsay, I'm going to start with you. My first question for you is, as a legal services provider and as a leader who has been on the front lines fighting with your clients and for your clients, why is this issue so urgent?
Thank you, Kika, and thanks for having me here to represent the entire team at Immigrant Defenders Law Center on this really exciting and important day. And what you're asking is a really important question. Why now? And for legal service providers, the urgency of this moment comes from having a front row seat for years to the devastation of families being ripped apart by an unjust system where there is no hope for due process when accessing a lawyer is impossible. But it also comes from witnessing firsthand the impact that representation can have for individual clients and often for their entire families. Studies have shown that people are 3.5 times more likely to be freed from ICE prisons if they're represented in their bond hearings. And knowing that the difference between imprisonment in an ICE prison and freedom may mean missing the birth of your child. It may mean the difference between the ability to put food on the table or the ability to keep your family housed at all. It is so important. So this knowledge pushes us to feel an urgency to make sure that everyone facing detention and deportation has a lawyer to give them a fighting chance. It also injects humanity into an inhumane system. It gives people hope. As you said earlier, it does not fix a deeply unjust, a deeply broken system, but it does bring us closer to the systemic change that we need. We know that people imprisoned by ICE are 10.5 times more likely to be able to obtain relief from deportation. And that means 10.5 times more likely to be able to stay with their families, to not lose their homes, to not be exiled from their communities. The stakes simply couldn't be higher. And that instills in us a sense of urgency in this moment. It's crucially important that we fight for a system that truly leaves no immigrant behind, no asylum seeker, no longtime residents, no veterans, that no one is left behind by this movement. So this means that we create a just system that rejects the good immigrant, bad immigrant narrative that has been used to divide immigrant communities. And while we've made strides in local jurisdictions to be able to create truly universal programs that don't exclude anyone, it's vitally important that that go national, that the advocacy now pivot to the creation of a universal federal system that ensures due process for all immigrants facing deportation, and that it have no exceptions. And this advocacy push must include support for an expansion of the current national programs while moving us towards federal legislation that guarantees the right for representation for all. A national federal representation program will also move us closer to the abolition of immigrant detention nationally. Currently, in jurisdictions where representation is well resourced, there's motivation for ICE to transfer immigrants to places where they cannot access representation, where they can't access relief, where they can't access justice. And we need to ensure that all immigrants have equal access to representation, an equal shot at staying home with their families. That there's not a very real threat that if they get a lawyer in California, that they will not be sent to a remote detention center in the deep South, where we know winning relief from deportation is nearly statistically impossible. So if we want to understand the urgency of this moment right now for universal representation, we just need to think about what kind of systemic change we could see if every single person imprisoned by ICE in Georgia and Louisiana had a lawyer. So I'm very honored to be able to introduce to everybody a client of Immigrant Defenders Law Center who can speak directly about the impact that getting representation has had in his case. Ramon has lived in Los Angeles since he was 10 years old. He's an active community member and leader. In 2019, Ramon was detained by ICE, separated from his family and his 5 children, and imprisoned for 6 months at the notorious Adelanto ICE prison. But unlike most people facing deportation, he was able to access counsel through a locally funded initiative in Los Angeles. And so Ramon, it is my great honor to be able to introduce you today, and I pass the virtual mic over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Glad I'll be able to speak on behalf of everybody that is detained right now. My name is Ramon. Like you said, I was detained from April 2nd to October 11th in Adelanto. I was detained for 6 months. Once you get to Adelanto, it's like you guys are speaking on. It's so much of a fear. It's a fear. You get in there, you don't know what to expect. I was detained on April the 2nd. My first court date was going to be April the 10th. I was clueless on what I was facing, what was going to happen. It was a big burden that I had on my back. Obviously, thinking about my children, thinking about being deported. Because all the information you get when you're detained is from fellow inmates. Not everybody's case is the same, but you have people that have been detained there for 2, 3, 4, 5 years that are still fighting the case because they don't have a chance to or the means of being able to pay for an attorney for a paid attorney. They don't have that type of money, which can exceed maybe from $8,000 to $10,000 for somebody to represent you. In my case, once I got help from Chelsea, which is the lawyer that represents me now, there was a big burden taken off my back. I was able to relax. My family were able to understand the process. I was able to understand a little bit of the process because obviously there's so many laws when it comes to immigration that we're not aware of. But it brought some peace of mind to myself to understand that there were options, that I wasn't going to be deported right away, that I had a chance of fighting my case and hopefully stick around to be here with my kids, which it has been the case. Like I said, after 6 months, I was able to go to a bond hearing. That if it wasn't for my lawyer, I wouldn't have been able to prepare a bond package that it took a few months for her to prepare, collecting paperwork from family members, from friends. I would have not been able to do that on my own. So it's very stressful. It's very stressful to be in there. You have zero contact with the world. All you have is it's your fellow inmates. And thanks to having these programs that give you that hope, mainly it gives you a hope that you're not alone, that you will be able to get through it. It might be a long period of time where you have to fight and fight and fight, but it's obviously it's worth it because we have, in my case, I've been here since I'm 10 years old. I'm from El Salvador. I don't want to go back to a country that I do no longer know anymore. So thanks to what's been helping me with my communication with my lawyer, since I've been out, I've been able to get a work permit. Recently, I got my driver license back, so I'm able to come back into society and be productive as I can. Thanks to the help that I'm getting. I wouldn't have been able to do this on my own because I'm not aware of all the laws, of all the immigration changes that happen on the weekly, monthly basis. So I think it's very important for anybody that's going through this process to be represented by somebody that knows the law, somebody that can help you, somebody that can guide you through it, because you are on your darkest times when you're detained for 6 months for just because you haven't committed any crime, you haven't done anything, you're just an illegal immigrant that needs to be in there for 6 months. So I believe it's very important for us to get that help, to get that help, and also help people that have that language barrier. Not a lot of people speak English, so it's more confusing. It's harder for people that don't speak English to understand all the laws that go into play. I myself, I'm still confused out of so many things that have been said to me, and I speak English, so I can only imagine the people that don't speak the language, how hard it must be to them to not be able to represent themselves in court, and do this on their own. With that being said, I would like to close by saying, going to an immigration court hearing without a lawyer, it's like going to war without a weapon. Thank you guys very much. This is my time.
Thank you so much, Ramon. Very powerful words that remind us why we've been working diligently for the last 8 months to think about how this campaign could be so meaningful to people who are facing our immigration system. And Lindsay, for sharing some of your work and your perception from the vantage point that you offer. Now I'm pleased to welcome two leaders of the immigrant rights movement, two incredible leaders who also happen to be NPNA co-chairs and have been freedom fighters for a very long time. Angelica Salas, Executive Director of the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, CHIRLA, and Gustavo Torres, Executive Director of CASA, who I have two questions for you. One, I would like for you to answer, as movement leaders, why is this campaign for universal representation important to you and to your state? And what does this campaign mean, or what would it signify for the members and would-be members in your respective states and in our movement? So I'll start with Angelica, and then the same question for Gustavo.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for your leadership, Nicole, and thank you, Kika, as well as you at the National Partnership for New Americans and the Vera Institute for spearheading this crucial and timely Fairness to Freedom campaign. My name is Angelica Salas, and I'm the Executive Director of CHIRLA, and I am so proud to represent our CHIRLA members in California, but also our incredible CHIRLA staff, including a fierce CHIRLA legal team. For us in California, we're so excited to see this effort go national with so many partners. It builds on the work that CHIRLA and its allies have done to expand legal representation to immigrants facing deportation. I will talk more about that in a bit. First, I want to broaden the perspective. This campaign does not just represent its core goal of universal representation and due process for immigrants facing deportation, but also one of dignity. Immigrants have more than earned this affirmation of their dignity after contributing to this country for years, if not decades. And then during the COVID-19 pandemic, they were deemed as essential, yet the dignity and justice that would seem to accompany that status is so often absent. This dignity also means the right to seek asylum and ending Title 42 and programs like the Remain in Mexico program. The right, this also means, dignity means the right for family unity, to come to this country and be with your family, including if you have been unjustly deported. And finally, the right to permanent protections in the form of a green card, the path to citizenship, and using, from our perspective, what is already in the law registry. Let me briefly address CHIRLA and California's work on legal representation. Since 2012, CHIRLA has been engaged in providing direct legal services. It began with DACA, and of course, for a long time, we had been doing naturalization and family unity. Soon after, CHIRLA added its removal defense unit, focusing on both detained and non-detained clients. In particular, I want to stress the importance of having a lawyer for those who are detained. And so I really want to say thank you, Ramon, for speaking for so many people in detention who need the support of a lawyer. They're often detained because they cannot pay bond, and without a lawyer, they will remain detained away from their family. CHIRLA also does referrals to other providers who specialize in specific areas, including working with unaccompanied children. This is where we, for example, work with Lindsay and immigrant defenders. It is an honor to work with her and her team, many which I know are on this webinar. So thank you so much for the work you do. We've worked together to advocate for the most vulnerable, especially unaccompanied children and their families who deserve resources and legal representation. When thousands of children arrived in Long Beach and Pomona, we knew they needed care and treatment. And I remember Lindsay saying, but they also need legal representation. Such collaboration between organizations like ours is the backbone of building and nurturing an infrastructure that can lead to universal representation. The work in California is grounded in the unique collaboration from state and local governments working alongside philanthropy with us. They understand that these investments, given the broken, unjust, and yes, racist immigration system, help communities and families stay together and thus result in significant returns that benefit Los Angeles, California, and the country. The governor, for example, proposed in his budget to maintain $75 million to the California Department of Social Services for qualified immigration services for immigrants, including deportation defense, naturalization, counsel for unaccompanied minors, and other immigration-related services. LA County has allocated a minimum of $5 million for deportation defense and affirmative relief. Our Represent LA, which is spearheaded by CHIRLA, immigrant defenders, Carescens, and many others, will also be launching in the coming days connected to our Fairness to Freedom campaign. It is also long past time for California and other states' investments to be matched, in fact, by the federal government. Paying for high quality legal representation makes sense for so many reasons, including the federal government funds both the federal government funds both the immigration judge and ICE prosecutor, who together decide the fate of an immigrant facing deportation. This year, the White House made an unprecedented request for legal representation funding for some $150 million. Beyond that, the budget contains a goal to expand that to $400 million per year for adults and families, and to achieve universal representation for unaccompanied minors within 10 years. Representative Norma Torres, who helped set up the Welcoming Center for Unaccompanied Minors in Pomona outside Los Angeles, is the congressional champion on these issues. We are grateful for her for this, knowing she can do so by pointing to the work that is being done back home. This campaign brings this work in California and elsewhere to its logical conclusion: high quality universal representation, fairness to freedom, and justice for all. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Angelica. Gustavo, Casa, you're next. Why is this campaign so important for you, for the states that you serve, and for the thousands of members you have in your network that are looking for support in facing the immigration system? Turn it over to you.
Sure. Nicole, thank you so much for your leadership. Kika, so very glad to see you, and thank you for everything that you're doing for this community. I really appreciate this. And let me answer your question, Nicole. CASA has been fighting for access to justice for our members and all immigrants for decades. Over the past several years, CASA has joined with VERA and local partners like Care Coalition to fight for the right to counsel for all detainees in Marylanders and beyond. This is important, essential even, but it's not enough. We are proud to support MPNA and VERA and all of the partners on this campaign to ensure that immigrants across the country have access to high quality lawyers to defend their rights, helping to keep families and communities together. This campaign is totally linked to the campaign to abolish immigration detention, which exposes our members to immoral and inhumane conditions that can be life-threatening. In Maryland, we won the Dignity No Detention Act last year, which means that all ICE detention centers in the state will be closed by the end of 2022. But ICE continue to threaten our communities and detain our members, even opening a new detention center in Pennsylvania and expanding bed spaces and another detention center in Georgia. Lawyers alone cannot solve this problem, but they can help mitigate the damage done by ICE and help uplift the stories of those who have been impacted. In order to achieve the real victory, ending immigration detention and winning immigration reform in Congress, we all have to join together to support impacted individuals and communities. And Nicole, finally, I want to make a comment about Title 42. Despite that the Trump appointee judge temporarily blocked President Biden's termination of Title 42, that many of you call Mexico, reminding Mexico policy, which is one of the most racist policy in generations, providing every newcomer access to legal counsel is even more important and urgent than ever in preparation for the May 23rd termination of this hateful policy. Well, the new arrivals will finally be allowed to apply for asylum again, which, by the way, was always the right under US and international law. Without legal support, it will be very difficult for asylum seekers to fully realize their rights. Our asylum system is complex, often requires significant supporting evidence and testimony, which those fleeing trauma should not have to navigate on their own. This is what we believe is totally unacceptable and essential that they have attorneys. And Nicole, now is my honor and my privilege to introduce to you a fighter, somebody, a member of our community who have been fighting for many years. Rafael is from Nicaragua. He has been here in this country for almost 20 years. Despite his deep connection with this country, he is facing potential deportation because still we have this immigration system in crisis. So I want to welcome Rafael, who is going to say a few words and share his experience. Rafael, please, you go ahead.
Gracias. Buenas tardes a todos. Mi nombre es Rafael. Soy inmigrante indocumentado de Nicaragua y miembro de la organización CASA. Vine a Estados Unidos hace 20 años para tener la oportunidad de vivir el sueño americano.
I'm just going to translate for Rafael. Good afternoon, my name is Rafael. I am an undocumented immigrant from Nicaragua and a member of the CASA organization. I came to the United States 20 years ago to have the opportunity to live out the American dream.
Como muchos inmigrantes que cruzan la frontera, yo también enfrenté todos los peligros de cruzar un desierto caluroso y un río peligroso.
Like many immigrants across the border, I too faced all the dangers of crossing a hot desert and a dangerous river.
Tuve la suerte de sobrevivir al viaje y me sentí aliviado de ver a mi familia esperándome del otro lado una vez que crucé la frontera. Pero para tantos que vienen por la misma oportunidad, muchos no sobreviven esta travesía.
I was lucky enough to survive the trip and was relieved to see my family waiting for me on the other side once I crossed the border. But for so many who come over for the same opportunity, many do not survive the passage.
Hoy mis experiencias de vida y sufrimiento como inmigrante indocumentado en este país me han enseñado una valiosa lección.
Today, my life experiences and suffering as an undocumented immigrant in this country have taught me a valuable lesson.
A medida que nuestras comunidades y familias continúan enfrentando violencia, guerras, hambrunas y desastres naturales en todo el mundo, es más vital que nunca que Estados Unidos tenga políticas que acojan y protejan a los solicitantes de asilo e inmigrantes, familias e inmigrantes como yo, que venimos en busca de una vida mejor.
As our communities and families continue to face violence, wars, famine, and natural disasters across the globe, it is more vital than ever for the United States to have policies that welcome and protect asylum seekers and immigrants, families and immigrants like myself who come in search of a better life.
La deportación es una de las consecuencias más duras que un individuo puede enfrentar bajo un sistema de inmigración obsoleto. El sistema es cruel y discriminatorio contra las personas de color. Además, muchos en el sistema de inmigración no tienen los fondos para representación legal.
Deportation is one of the harshest consequences an individual can face under an outdated immigration system. The system is cruel and discriminatory against people of color. In addition, many in the immigration system do not have the funds for legal representation.
Si Estados Unidos defiende los juicios justos y la representación legal para todos, debe proteger y proporcionar representación legal universal para aquellos que enfrentan una detención y deportación también.
If the U.S. stands for fair trials and legal representation for all, it must protect and provide universal legal representation for those who face detention and deportation as well.
Aquellos que pueden pagar y tienen acceso a la representación legal tienen una mejor oportunidad de ganar su caso o establecer un camino a seguir en su estatus migratorio.
Those who can afford and have access to legal representation have a better chance of winning their case or establishing a pathway forward in their immigration status.
Por eso estoy aquí para exigir una distribución de fondos para garantizar el derecho a una representación legal para todas las personas en los Estados Unidos, independientemente de su estatus migratorio.
And that is why I'm here today, to demand a distribution of funds to guarantee the right to legal representation for all people in the United States, regardless of their immigration status.
Gracias a los esfuerzos de CASA, pudimos asignar fondos para la representación legal de personas detenidas y procedimientos de deportación en nuestra legislación estatal de Maryland este año.
Thanks to the efforts of CASA, we were able to allocate funds for legal representation for detained people and deportation proceedings in our Maryland state legislation this year.
Y hoy aquí estoy para apoyar y decirles a todos que debemos de hacer esto a nivel nacional. Es hora de comenzar a tratar a los inmigrantes con dignidad y es hora de mantener unidas a las familias.
And I'm here today to support and tell everyone that we must do this at the national level. It's time to start treating immigrants with their dignity, and it's time to keep families together.
Muchas gracias por su atención y pasen muy buenas tardes.
Thank you guys so much for the time and have a good afternoon.
Muchas gracias. Muchísimas gracias, Rafael, por compartir su historia con nosotros y le deseo justicia. Oscar, Mr. Chacon from Alianza, the next question is for you. For us at Vera, fighting for universal representation really is part of our fight to transform a deeply flawed system of justice and to end the criminalization of immigrants, particularly Black and Brown immigrants. I'm wondering if you can share with us why universal representation is a priority for Alianza right now.
It'll be my pleasure. And first of all, it's a great honor to be in the company of everyone in this call, particularly those that in face of so many difficulties are putting up a fight. Let me begin by saying that Alianza Americas is a Latin American immigrant-led network in the United States committed to advancing strategies intended to improve the quality of life of our communities in the US, but also of people in our countries of origin. We focus on building democracy, proposing solutions to systemic inequities, putting forward truth-based narratives that can ultimately allow us to think clearly, and advocating for the rights of people in migration. We are absolutely delighted to be partnering this morning with everyone here, but particularly the Vera Institute of Justice and the National Partnership for New Americans in the launching of Fairness to Freedom, a universal representation campaign, which would be incredibly beneficial if it were reality today to the very communities that we work with. Because we believe that no immigrant should face the deeply racist and xenophobic immigration policy now in place without the benefit of capable legal representation. I have to say that in an ideal world, we should have left behind long ago the horrible racist xenophobic law that we now have in place, a law that is driven by the desire to exclude, to restrict, and to punish immigrants, largely enacted in 1996. But while we obviously believe that that would be an important goal, and that we should have replaced such a horrible law with one based on the recognition of immigrants as a vastly positive factor in our society and in the world, the reality is it continues to be the law of the land. Therefore, the struggle to change all of our immigration law must continue without rest. But while we get there, having universal representation in place would be a major benefit for all immigrant communities. We add ourselves to this campaign, Kika, because we also see in it a complement to our own Freedom for All campaign, which is a campaign that seeks to end the hate and profit-driven detention of immigrants, which on a yearly basis takes away the freedom of people who are in the US and have seen their freedom taken away simply because they committed an immigration law infraction. Billions of dollars in US taxpayers' money are used every year to bring pain in multiple ways to human beings simply because we were born outside the United States of America, while also enriching corporations dedicated to making money by taking our freedom away. Not one human being should have her or his freedom taken away as a result of having committed an immigration law infraction, which, by the way, continues to be an administrative law. So therefore, for Alianza Americas, we are proud, joyful to be part of this noble effort and to be part of every action that will be necessary to ensure that we can pass the changes in federal law that will get us to a new day where hopefully we get rid of the immigration policy that we now have. But between now and then, we can ensure that people have access to capable representation to fight against such a horrible white supremacist, xenophobic law that we now have in place. That's why we are here, Kika.
Thank you so much, Oscar. The next question is for two deeply committed public officials. I call them Mujeres Valientes or Mujeres Chingonas. They've been champions in their communities. Commissioner Anaya from Cook County, Illinois, and Assembly Member Catalina Cruz, who I had the deep honor and pleasure of working with in New York. Welcome and thank you for being with us. I'm going to ask both of you the same question. Earlier today, I spoke about the growth of this movement for representation in communities across the country. And we noted that over the last 5 years, we've stood up deportation defense programs such that today there are over 50 jurisdictions across the country that have deportation defense programs. Thanks in part to your leadership, we have deportation defense programs in New York and in Cook County, Illinois. We also have deportation defense programs in a number of other places, including Philadelphia and New Jersey and Nevada, and the list goes on. I'm wondering if each of you can talk to us a little bit about the efforts that you have led in your respective communities and why you chose, of the many options that you have to throw down, why you chose universal representation as one of the issues that you have so beautifully and passionately and successfully fought for. And I'm going to go alphabetically. So I'm going to ask Commissioner Anaya to speak first.
Thank you, Kika, for having us here. And I apologize. I know I was having some difficulty with audio, so hopefully everybody can hear me now. But yeah, thank you so very much. I am very proud to be here with you all. I want to thank both NP, NA, and Vera for joining us in this conversation. It's very extremely important. So yeah, my name is Alma Naya. I'm a Cook County Commissioner. I represent over 300,000 people in Chicago. So I have the highest concentration of Latinos and immigrants in the whole county. I'm also very proud to stand here as the youngest woman ever elected in Cook County government, and also the first and only Latina in over 30 years. And one of the first formally undocumented to hold office. And that speaks to why I chose this issue. Again, I'm very proud to announce that in 2021, we officially made history in Cook County by becoming the largest county in the nation to fund an immigration unit. This is definitely a step forward for universal representation. This unit has major advancements for immigrants in the whole county. We actually have somebody representing people, and they had, it took many years in the making, and it's been an opportunity that I had with taking different trips to the border, going to talk to people that have been separated in the border in different states, also going to San Francisco and other municipalities that started with smaller immigration units and really build it into what it is today. It has been very impactful. I think one of the biggest lessons that I have learned was sitting in immigration court and seeing the impact of actually having legal representation and what that means for the outcomes, what that means really for potential separation of families. And we know we need to keep moving in that direction. It makes the world of a difference. It saves it. It saves lives. And you spoke a little bit on this, Kika, regarding the impact on Black and Latinx immigrants more than any other group. And this is just, the statistics are telling us, right? And this is why it's an important initiative, because it changes lives, it changes the outcomes, it prevents family separations. And we've heard many of the testimonies of why it's important, why we need to continue to push forward in many other municipalities and at a national level to have universal representation. But we know that this is just the beginning. What we did in Cook County, we're hoping to continue to expand, not only here in our immigration unit, but expand in different areas and different municipalities, and hopefully get to that. It's not a secret that our immigration system is broken. We know that. We know that the previous federal administration didn't help us in this situation, and we're saying enough is enough. We need to continue to push to work collaboratively to ensure that immigrants have their rights, that they have legal representations, and this is a priority, and it should be a priority at the federal level. So I'm very proud to stand here with you all to share this great initiative here in Cook County, and hopefully we can continue this. This is really exciting. It's definitely hopefully a new day for immigrants and for their outcomes. So I'll hand it over to my counterpart in New York.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Kika, it's so good to see you. I hope I can see you up here in the halls of Albany very soon. I think the stories of women like Commissioner Naya and myself are the epitome of el que más la sufre es el que más la lucha. It's those of us who have been through that struggle of knowing what it's like to be undocumented, what it's like to get a letter from USCIS asking you to kindly leave the country if you get that far, that understand the fear of having to walk through that entire system without understanding the language, without understanding the system, without access to a lawyer because you don't have any money. And it's one of the main reasons why I decided to do this work. I am also formerly undocumented. I grew up as a dreamer for many, many years and had the luck, because for many of us it's luck, to become documented, and it shouldn't be. Sorry, allergies. And then I had the opportunity to become a lawyer. I was an immigration lawyer in doing policy for about 10 years. And actually, that's how I met Vera way back when we kicked ICE out of Rikers. But the work doesn't stop just there. There was so much more to do. And one of the things that we saw over and over again is we saw it with the children who were coming through the border, who were 3 years old, being forced to go in front of a judge to figure out what was going to happen with their lives. We saw it with the moms, with their mothers. We saw it with the quote unquote caravans, if you will, because that's what they were being called colloquially, that people were fleeing the countries, and we didn't even get into the piece about how most of what was happening in those countries back home was the fault of the United States. And when people came here to look for help, not only did we often close the doors on them, but when they did have the doors open, they had to go through that entire system without understanding what was happening. If you face the criminal justice system, the Constitution allows you to have a lawyer, allows you to make sure that there is a lawyer to walk you through that, to help you understand what your rights are, to help you give up those rights if that is what you choose to do. But in immigration court, you have criminal consequences, but you have only the rights that are given to someone that goes through the civil system. You could lose your freedom, you could get deported, you could lose your livelihood, but you are not entitled to the one person who could actually guide you through the process, and that's a lawyer. And so for me, as a lawyer myself, as a formerly undocumented person, and actually as the person that represents the neighborhoods with the highest number of undocumented New Yorkers, this is personal. Ensuring that we have immigrant legal services available to just about everyone is personal. We went from a program that was funded at the tune of $10 million. And this year, we are extremely ecstatic that it has been basically doubled the funding. But we know, and as Commissioner Anaya said, the federal government has failed us. And as long as they continue to fail us, as long as there continues to be a bottleneck of cases in immigration court, you're going to need way more money than just $10 million, than just $20 million. We need a truly universal program. And I'm of the opinion that if you as the federal government are the ones causing this havoc, then you as the federal government should be putting the money into ensuring that every single person that steps foot into an immigration court has a lawyer to be able to defend their rights. So I am very happy to see so many faces of people that I know and that I have worked with and that I admire, dedicated to making sure that this becomes a national effort. We as the state are often forced and put in the position of stepping in to kind of plug the hole where the federal government fails to act. The reality is this is the federal government's fault. The law says people can come into this country, seek asylum. And even if it didn't say that, once they're here, we are the country that supposedly believes that under our Constitution, under our sun, if you will, everyone should have the same rights, except if you're Black, brown, or poor, or an immigrant. And we have to change that. And so for me, standing alongside folks like Kika and folks like Commissioner Anaya to fight for something like this is extremely important. And I look forward to the day where we don't have to have these conversations, where we can say, remember way back when.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Assemblymember Cruz and Commissioner Anaya, for your leadership and for joining us today for our call to action so that we can finally call on Congress to act on universal representation. I want to thank all of our panelists, the organizations and allies that joined us today, CASA, Churla, Immigration Defenders, and of course, the many organizations that tuned in to join us live. And Rafael and Ramon, thank you for sharing our stories. We continue to be humbled and grounded in the work as we want to make sure that everybody is seen, heard, and most importantly, represented as they face our immigration system. We invite you to join us to be a part of the campaign. We know there are many ways for all of you to plug in. We're going to close out with asking all of you to join us in calling on Congress to introduce a federal bill for universal representation now. You can join us by endorsing and supporting the campaign. You can invite others to join the campaign, and you can lift up on social media using the hashtag #FairToFree or hashtag #FairnessToFreedom. Thank you for joining us today. We thank all of you, and we are so excited for you to join us in our movement to move forward universal representation for everyone facing our immigration system. Thank you again.